Alright, World War III started already. What does that even mean? Well, it's not like a World War II where bombs are being dropped everywhere. There's trouble areas right now in the world where obviously there is actual warfare, but this kind of World War III that's happening is more like cyber and economic. There's many factors that lead up to it. Let me give you the best example here. The fact that Hitler started going or rising in power for so long, it almost took half a decade before he got to the pinnacle of his power, the one that we know Hitler for today. But there was a lot of moving parts, like slow moving parts that took shape over years and years and years of conflict. And these conflicts, they arise from a bunch of macroeconomic situations. So this is the part where you really got to bear with me here, because the theory that I have, and a lot of people, not just me really, this comes from Ray Dalio, if you know who he is. If you don't know who he is, he manages the world's largest hedge fund in the world. It's like $150 billion or something like that. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Basically, pension funds go to him with all their money and go, hey, make this more money for us. So it's his job to make sure he knows what the fuck's going on everywhere in the world. Because if he doesn't do it correctly, then he loses a lot of money. This dude's been warning the world since 2017. And this is the crux of what he's talking about. Basically, when you have an economic crisis, which comes from debt, basically when people owe money, what is a debt anyway? It's basically when some person owes someone else money. And when you owe someone money, you have to pay it back eventually. The alternative to that is either, they fight you for it, which is a war, or you declare bankruptcy and everyone gets fucked. See, the thing about bankruptcy is that what happens is your relationship with the other country that you owe the money to gets deteriorated heavily. So right now, what the Federal Reserve is doing, like pumping so much money into the American currency that the US dollar is being devalued. The problem lies in the fact that every time you print cash, that cash becomes less valuable in the eyes of everyone else. Because if you're using that cheap route instead of actually paying back through your current amount of money, what happens is no other country trusts you to actually have value in your own currency, which in turn makes them not want to buy into your stuff. So just to put it, like, this is a very complex situation, but to put it simply, what happens is whenever a country, fuck's sake, oh my god, my breath's out, yo. All right, so whenever a country prints way more cash than they should be printing, it's generally because they've hit a crisis or an emergency. And that's an indication to everyone else that, hey, this country shouldn't be trusted with any more investments because we're not going to get our money back. The only reason someone gives you money to borrow in the first place, the only reason debt is created is so that you paid back with more money. That's the whole idea, so that everyone kind of wins. So when you go the bankruptcy route or when you go the money printer route, no, not everybody wins. In fact, a lot of people lose. But in terms of being the lesser of two evils, it's way, way better for a country to do that than to just declare bankruptcy. Look at what happened in Greece. Their economy got fucked heavy because they just declared bankruptcy with all the problems. Funny enough, Goldman Sachs was actually a broker for it. So they made a bunch of money through brokering that situation, that bankruptcy. All right, it's getting way too convoluted right now. So let me just bring it up to what you need to know. At the end of the day, right now, USA, China, Russia, all these powers are slowly constricting their borders. They're attacking everyone else and increasing in nationalism, which is national pride in the sense of, my cultural identity is better than someone else's cultural identity. And this is the groundwork for what happened, again, in World War II. It's a slow process where you initially start with, oh, hey, it's their fault for doing this or that. But then eventually it becomes, oh, this fucking XYZ, screw them. My unhappiness is because that country's fucking up. So again, it's these little things which, if you notice the macroeconomics of it, look at President Trump. This fucking guy is talking about Kung Flu. He gets away by saying that. Like, how offensive of a term is that? But the fact that he can go on national TV and say it is already indication that the world is slowly shifting towards a slightly more xenophobic viewpoint. So you see some horrible example, like what happened to the Jewish people under Hitler's rule. and 6 million people had to die because of this guy's idiocy. And you think, how the fuck was the world so stupid back then? Don't people realize that people are people? Well, yeah, people realize it for the most part. But what happens if suddenly, you've been unemployed for 6-7 months, you have no other outlet for your frustration, and then the government comes and tells you, hey, all that problem that's going on, that's not your fault. That's some other country in the middle of fucking nowhere's fault. And that if we only declare war, we're gonna have all the solutions. People want short-term solutions because at the end of the day, it's just an easier thing to have than to think about the complex problems that we're in. Okay, so that's a way, way, way oversimplified version of what's actually happening. If you really want a long version, basically what's happening is right now the debt markets, well, not the debt markets, the capital markets are way, way overextended, and it's being propped up by the Federal Reserve in the US. But that's not the only central bank that's doing it. China's doing it. Every other single fucking central bank is doing the same thing. And because nobody wants their markets to crash to look bad. That's basically the gist of it. But eventually what's going to happen is they will crash and they have to blame someone for it. So that won't happen right now, but for sure in a few years down, this thing's going to start crumbling. Like if you look at the housing market right now, how does it make sense that income hasn't risen? Everyone's basically up to their neck to debt, and yet the housing market is in short supply because demand is so high. That's an artificial inflation by the government. And, you can't really blame the government for doing what they're doing either, because what do you want? You want economic collapse now or later? Well, anything that's bad now is horrible. So I'll just push it down for the next person who's in charge. That's the whole mentality of the whole world, which is it's pretty fucked up, but that's what it is. I'm a bit salty because I'm betting against the market, so I'm betting that the market's gonna crash. I got a bunch of puts against Snapchat because I think in a real economic downturn, that thing's gonna crumble like a motherfucker. They're basically propped up on investor money. So unless they keep raising more and more money, they're gonna just, sink. That's just the nature of business. However, the nature of business is irrelevant right now because if you have a central bank that's inflating the currency, then the dollar isn't worth the dollar anymore. All right, let's go back to topic on what we were actually discussing in terms of World War III. Why is the war already started? Well, if you look at the tariffs and the freaking ban, Trump recently just went out of nowhere. Oh, hey, I'm gonna ban TikTok. It's such an aggressive move against one company of allegiance to a certain country or whatnot. But look what Google was gonna do. If Google can't bleed into China, then Trump is saying, well, TikTok can't bleed into America. But that free market idea breaks down the second you impose those rules. So it's even more complicated than that because China was exploiting the free market rules by benefiting for their own without letting North American countries penetrate into China, even though China was actively investing all over the world. So it's not like anyone is right in this. It's all about interests and how self-interests evolve over time. But what I'm saying is the end of this, the end of what happens with so much self-interest is that you have to pay. Sooner or later, you have to pay. And the easiest way to do that is to just either declare bankruptcy or inflate the currency. Oh, you want to pay the $10? Let's print the $10. See, the more I'm talking about this, I realize there's way too many pieces to even bring it together. But let me give you the best example in terms of something that everyone can relate to. Look at right now, the general sentiment against China. 2 years ago, if you said anything remotely negative about China, people would be like, hey, why are you being a racist fuck? This is so weird. Like, stop hating on a country just because, those people have a different culture. But now, the needle is slowly shifting because the general media is slowly trashing all these other countries that don't have the same agenda as North America does. And if you realize that it's all about agenda, then you can kind of clearly see what's happening. Because if you see what China's doing with US companies, it's the same thing. They have their own agenda and they're trying to limit the growth of North American companies in their country. So of course the USA needs to retaliate and try to, be this guardian of all the countries or all the companies in North America from having the opposite effect. However, the problem with that is the US is the the US is the fucking reserve currency, which means the world, it's like the gold standard. So when you use the gold standard for your own I wouldn't say egotistical, but your own agenda and bias, suddenly it's a different ballgame. Because it's like, let's say there's 10 people in the world, and one of the people has invented the internet. One of those guys, smart guy, invented the internet and now gives it out to everyone else. Suddenly that one person who has the most technology, the most finances, the most everything, that person gets to dictate the entire playing field just because they have so much power and pull. But what's happening right now with the world is player number 2 is starting to become just as powerful as player number 1. And that destability is causing a lot of tensions within the politicians of each country because they can see what's going on. Hopefully it doesn't play out at all the way I'm talking about it. But if it does go this route, like, what do you think is happening right now? They were talking about trade talks for the last 2 years before the coronavirus thing came about. And now the trade talks are completely out of the table, and they're adding more and more regulation, like the TikTok thing, Trump, attacking TikTok, and then China attacking all these American companies. Okay, another fucked up thing. A couple of years ago, there was the vice president of this company called Huawei. She was the daughter of the founder of Huawei, who went to Canada and then got arrested in Canada. That was one of the beginning steps of this whole trade tension. Just take it in the perspective of someone, just a human being. Imagine you built yourself a behemoth of a company and you worked your ass off for decades. You know what 10 years is? It's a long fucking time. Imagine you put 10, 20, 30 years into one company. You built it from scratch. You made it into a powerhouse that is now on the cusp of figuring out 5G technology and all this other crazy world innovations that everyone can benefit from. And out of nowhere, some country fucking kidnaps your daughter under the premise of arresting them for political reasons. But that's a fucked up thing to do. You know what that does? It increases resentment. And if you have enough dominoes that fall into place, you're gonna have a level of resentment that can't be taken back. And that is what eventually leads to these really fucked up situations that people don't want to address. And once again, in the future, when people look back at this, they'll be like, oh, this is so fucking stupid. Why didn't they just release the VP? You could have de-escalated this problem from the beginning. But the reason they didn't even bother de-escalating it from the beginning is because they didn't have an agenda to de-escalate it. Their whole agenda was to escalate it to the point that either China stops everything that they're doing. Of course, they won't fucking stop what they're doing. Or you have to go to war. I met someone from China who actually has an opinion. Yo, do you have an opinion on exactly what's happening in the situation right now?
No.
Okay, so let me redo that. All right, I'm just taking a really quick break, but the gist of what I'm trying to get at is you want good relations with country. You don't want to fuck it up by kidnapping people's daughters and then telling them to stop doing what they're doing, because that never works out. See, what I'm really getting at is the fact that one event, like someone arresting the VP of Huawei, doesn't do much. But when you have simultaneous events like the fact that they're banning TikTok and then China has to retaliate, they have to retaliate. If you can't, then it shows weakness in the world court. So you have to do these things. So it essentially leads to all these major powers. Again, if you have number 1 and number 2 fighting over these little things, then pretty much everyone in the playground suffers. And we're not seeing the repercussion of that yet because the central banks are fueling up the economy. But sooner or later, this is gonna all crumble. And when that happens, you have to blame someone. So obviously the West is gonna blame the East, and then the East is gonna blame the West. End point that I'm trying to make is the fact that if you just look at the relationship between America and China right now, it's already at a point of no return. So you can just surmise based on what the fuck is going on that it's just gonna get worse than get better, because the crisis that we have with COVID is really gonna destroy our economy. And sooner or later, people have to point fingers. And when they do point fingers, they're not gonna point it at us. They're not gonna say, oh, we fucked up. We should maybe not be in so much debt. They're not gonna say that. Instead, they're gonna say, China stole all our business ideas. That's what's fucked up. So in conclusion, what I'm saying is that World War III has started. And it's not a war like you see in World War II where people are dying in a battlefield. This is people dying a slow death through economic poverty. People being tremendously affected by the actions of our world leaders. And we can change it. But guess what? History has shown nobody fucking changes it. What happens is we are retroactive as a species. So once all this fucking plays out, we're gonna be in a way better situation. But for now, oh my God, yo, I just wish you luck if you're whether in the West or the East, because the next 5 years is gonna get really fucked up. Anyway, thanks for watching. Peace.